Welcome to Short Course, episode 91, for February 10th, 2023. I'm your host, Ben Barry. As promised last week, I will be talking this week about the class that I took shortly before the Pan American match. The class was with Eric Grauffel, and I pronounce that deliberately because watching videos of him speak, I've realized that I have been pronouncing his name wrong, and I think everybody I know has been, but it's Grauffel. That's the way he pronounces it, so I will try to get that right throughout this, or I'll just call him Eric, but Eric Grauffel. So I had the opportunity to take a 2-day class with him, as I mentioned last week. It was just one of these things out of the blue. Buck Lawler from this group Strapped, who ended up basically, from what I heard of the story, basically just kept saying, "Hey man, we want to do a class with you. We want to do a class with you," and through pure persistence, got him to make it happen, because in part he was already in the U.S. for SHOT Show. So basically he flew back from SHOT Show, did two-day classes, and then shot the Pan American Extreme match at Volusia that I talked about last week, and then he got a well-deserved break back at home. And to be totally honest, the timing of the class couldn't have worked out better. Yes, it was not ideal trying to change a bunch of stuff right before the Pan American match, but I wasn't really trained up for that anyway. And as it is, having gone through this class and had a lot of things to work on and a lot of ideas to try and integrate, starting at the beginning of the year, honestly it's the best time this could have happened. So I've got sort of all these things to work through, and hopefully that's clear as I talk through this. I will try. First off, disclaimer: this is my secondhand regurgitation of what I think he said. If he were here, he might say there's some nuance to that, or there are some cases where this doesn't apply, or that sort of thing. But I will try and represent what he said as accurately as possible, and sort of give some nuance and context where I have understood it along the way. But nothing. This is not straight from his mouth. This is all sort of filtered through me. So I will try to be as faithful as I can, but no promises. And then second, a lot of these things that he talked about, a lot of the ideas that he introduced, I'm still processing and figuring out how to integrate them into my practice. So my view on these things is definitely not finalized, and I'm sure I'll be talking about some of the things that I learned and how I'm applying them throughout this year as I continue making podcasts about the various matches and whatnot that I'm shooting. So those disclaimers out of the way. My background training class-wise is that it's funny, there's a good parallel. So the first competition-focused class I ever took was with Steve Anderson in November of 2014. And I was thinking at the time, man, I'm just feeling really burned out. I'm not making progress. I was B class. I initially classified C. I'd managed to shoot enough classifiers that I didn't completely bomb to make it into B, but I felt like I'd come from IDPA. This was a whole different level of speed, and I didn't know where to go with it. And Steve Anderson taking the class, the main thing that he kind of opened my eyes on was just how you could structure dry fire and how you could make progress in dry fire with very simple drills that didn't necessarily need to represent a full USPSA stage. Now, I will say personally, my view on his program at this point is, especially, the 12 drills of refinement and repetition and all that, they are very good if you want to shoot sort of classical stand and shoot 6 reload 6 style classifiers. Obviously there's more to it, and I don't think he would deny that, but just the idea of, hey, pick some really simple stuff and just practice it really hard and you'll get a lot better, that really opened my eyes. And that's what actually got me to not just really get on a really sort of serious dry fire plan, but to look into getting a range membership so I could live fire, and that's how I ended up joining Sir Walter Gun Club. And so that kind of put me off on this whole path. And then over the years since then, there were, I want to say, 2 or 3 years where Ben Steger came and taught a class nearby, and I was able to be in those classes. And so sort of each year I got a kind of a check-in and a kick in the pants and a, hey, work on this. Hey, this is going okay. So those are the classes that I have context for. I haven't taken any other formal instruction since whenever the last time, I think it was probably 2017, 2018. somewhere in there that Ben came to North Carolina and I was able to get in one of his classes. But that said, I don't know that that's super relevant. I don't have a ton of ability to contrast, say, Eric with JJ, which is obviously a common, the class that I was taking was in Florida, so that was kind of a common topic. But that said, I don't think that'll really detract from what I have to say. I think a lot of what he says sort of stands on its own. So the general structure of the class, like I said, it was a 2-day class. So the morning of the first day, we did some everybody on a line, everybody has their target, just some kind of common firing line type stuff, which I think is probably part of just, getting a feeling for the class, being able to see everybody shoot kind of all at once, and just figure out where different people are, what different people are going to struggle with, that sort of thing. So I think that's probably, I would imagine, a common thing for him in classes, just as a starting measure to kind of start day one. We did some of that, just talking about drawing the gun and some of that common firing line type stuff. Set up a sample stage, everybody ran it, got some feedback on what they did, but also Eric was starting to say, hey, look at what the guys ahead of you on the stage are doing and use that to help inform your decision making. Try and get a sense of what the hit factor on the stage is going to be. What's the time that is, what's a good time on the stage? Where are people struggling? Where they having issues with hits? Watch the people in front of you if there's something that they did on the stage that you didn't see. If it's something that is useful, steal it. This was a class, but this was also a learning experience, and we were tracking the times and the hits and calculating the hit factors, and he was starting to get us into the idea of, okay, you want to be able to calculate hit factors without having to wait for practice score to spit it out. So know how many rounds the stage is, know how many total points it is. Take off of that, take the points that were the points down, so you have the number of points they earned, and then be able to calculate the hit factor. Use your phone calculator if you need to do it, but this idea that you should have a live ability to look at someone's run, calculate their hit factor, know what that means, and not just wait for practice score to spit the score out. He didn't phrase it exactly like that, but that was kind of, that's the interpretation I would give on it. That was definitely interesting to me in the sense that I know I've heard various Super Squad guys talking about the fact that they're tracking points and all this, but I wasn't really thinking in terms of, the actual nuts and bolts of how that was done. And that was a good setup. So right before lunch on the first day, we just had a sort of sit down lecture, and he used a target as the whiteboard and drew up a bunch of scenarios of, okay, calculate this hit factor. Okay, figure out who's winning the stage, figure out how many points they're ahead. And he really got a chance to kind of go into the way that he tracks everything in a stage and knows how many points ahead he is, or, how many points he needs to make up or something like that. And I mean, the short version is it all comes down to converting everything into stage points, and then just keeping a running tally, like I said, of who's how far ahead or behind. And then each stage you add or subtract from the gap and that sort of thing. And again, I knew that the top guys were doing this, but it was interesting to have him kind of give his perspective on it and the sort of process of how he gets from hits and time into stage points and then tracks that. And honestly, I enjoyed it. I mean, I am a very analytical person. I find when you can actually use math to do something practical, I find that kind of fun when I'm working on a carpentry project or a 3D printing project, and trigonometry actually is able to give me the exact answer to something. It's cool. And it's not something that happens every day. And so when you can actually flex that muscle and have it work for you, I enjoy that kind of stuff. And so to have him just at almost every turn, everything was very analytical. He was trying to put numbers on everything. When he would describe a partial, it would be 50%, 75%. When he was talking about how much trigger weight to have on the take up versus the break, it was fractions and percentages and very, you got a sense that it was very numerical. He had thought through these things, and it wasn't just I don't know, like 50-50. It was he actually had really put some precision and some thought into these things, and I appreciated that sort of analytical mindset, and it really came through. And obviously he knows that he's a gamer. He didn't, he wasn't trying to do any self-defense stuff or talk about carry guns or anything about that. This is everything he was doing was talking about, this is a game, here's the points, here's the scoring, you should know it. This is what we're really in this sport for. And if you want to take and apply that stuff to something else, obviously you can do that, but that's not what he was interested in, and that's not his subject matter. And so he knew, obviously, to leave that well enough alone, as though that needs saying. After lunch on the first day, then we spread things out on the bay a little bit more, set up a couple different stations, and worked on some specifics about movement, so techniques you would use for left to right versus front to back, and coming into position, leaving position, and just sort of the emphasis and what he looks for and the techniques that he's trying to apply. So that was very sort of nitty-gritty nuts and bolts. But then once the drills were set up and you ran them through, you also you were trying to apply those techniques that he was talking about and look for the things that he was trying to point out, but at the same time just generally apply all the other standards. So keep to the accuracy standard that he'd set and that sort of thing. And then to end day one, set up another kind of sample stage type thing, except I mean it was a very loose stage. There were no walls, there were just a couple of target stands as shooting positions, and it was much more like scored practice. It was, hey, the rules were very loose. I don't remember exactly which stage we did win, but the general format was something like, you can pick whichever position you want to shoot at, but you have to shoot at least one target from each position, but you can decide which targets you want to shoot from where. You can shoot 5 from one and then 1 from all the rest, and you can pick which one you start from. And so there was this element of problem solving, and you could tell that he really enjoyed setting up these problems and then playing with them, and A, trying to shoot them in lots of different ways, but B, also really not just trying to set up something that's a sort of narrow simulation of a USPSA or IPSC stage, but something that is a more expansive one where you actually have more problem solving, and it actually gives you more options, which, again, you won't necessarily see at a match, but the principles that you can learn and some of the advantages in this simplified scenario do sometimes apply. And so it was very interesting that you could tell that, he would kind of give us the stage brief and then kind of watch everybody try and figure out what they thought the best way to shoot it was. And he kind of enjoyed seeing the wheels turn, seeing how everybody thought. And I mean, I think obviously he knows the way that he would shoot each of these stages if it were for score or something like that. But again, it was interesting having this dynamic where we were keeping score for everyone that was shooting. We didn't write people's names next to their scores, although you kind of could remember, oh yeah, okay, so-and-so had the really good run, or, so-and-so dropped 2 mics or whatever. But just writing all these things down and then calculating the hit factor and just going through this exercise after every run. Okay, here's the time, here's the hits. How many points is that? Divide it by the time. What's the hit factor? And just trying to get people in the rhythm of not just, again, being dependent on practice score to do it, but being able to do it yourself, being comfortable. And it was definitely noticeable for me as we went through it. I mean, I know the math, but doing it quickly on the range when you're tired, when you've just shot, if you were just a shooter, maybe you're a little out of breath. I could feel myself getting faster just from repetition of that skill. And so that's definitely something that I'm trying to incorporate going forward. So as soon as I'm done on a stage, I want to be, obviously I want to know my points, but then, okay, how many rounds is it? Figure out the actual number of points that I got, calculate my hit factor, and just start working through those things and have that math not be as manual, not have it be so conscious, have it be a little more familiar and easy to do quickly. And then day 2, we started with a little more common fire line type stuff, had a little man-on-man competition, which is interesting, and that's definitely one of those, having everybody on the line firing next to you is definitely a type of pressure you don't get in a match, because there's just people shooting right next to you, even at a shoot-off, which is pretty rare here in the US. It's only one other person, but having 5, 6, 10 people next to you on the line shooting, I mean, it was cool. I enjoyed it, and anytime you get to have a little competition with your classmates, it's fun. And so obviously I think that gets, everybody gets a little trigger time to start the day. You get warmed up, and then we went into more of these kinds of separated drills where he'd set up, 2 practice setups or 3 practice setups, and you'd cycle through them and you'd run it and he'd give you feedback, and pretty standard instructor stuff. For us, the morning of day 2 was focused on transitions. So having diverse target arrays and working on shooting them in different orders and just transitioning between targets and having really crisp precise transitions, getting good points, not dragging Charlies on and off the target, that kind of thing. And this was both important on its own, but built on what the plan was for the afternoon, which was about shooting movers, primarily swingers. So the two major types, right? One being the over-the-top swinger and the other being the swinger that's available at the duel, the different approaches for shooting them, how he approaches it, what he is looking for in the swinger during the walkthrough to estimate various, his stage plan and that sort of thing. And again, on day 2, around lunchtime, and then at the end of the day, we had a little miniature stage, and everybody shot it, and you got to score each other and see all that kind of stuff. So that was the overall format. That was kind of the schedule. But spaced throughout, there would be digression. Someone would ask a question, or something would come up on a run, and we'd end up talking about something else. And that was really interesting. The class felt very customized. I did end up seeing some of what the second class did, and their whole structure was different. They had a whole block on shooting on the move instead of our stuff on transitions, and so he definitely customized it somewhat to the people. I know the class organizer had solicited us to say, hey, send me one thing you want to work on. So I don't know if a bunch of people in my class said transitions or what, but it was definitely all useful stuff. I was very happy with the topics covered, and the skills were interesting, but a lot of what I took away was also just the general mindset and the approach to the problems and the approach to practice and the sort of meta skills. Yeah, it was cool to have certain technique tips that'll definitely help me in the short term, but there's also some long-term stuff that I'm still going to be processing and integrating into my mindset going forward. And I mean, definitely the biggest one of that, and something that was the topic of a lot of conversation almost in every block of the class, was Eric's idea around how to practice and the importance of never practicing the same thing twice. And I'd heard this idea, but I never really understood it. And getting to see it applied the way that he practices, and also talk to him and understand the thinking a little bit better, it makes a lot of sense. And there are a few pieces to it. So the first one is, in talking to Eric and trying to understand his approach to stages, he didn't really subscribe to, I think, what is the standard American mental game post Brian Eno's dogma, that the goal is to shoot every stage as subconsciously as possible. The goal is to make your perfect movie of the stage and have everything go according to plan, and as long as everything does go according to plan, it will. Now, this is not what he said. He basically just said he's not trying to shoot a stage in pure subconscious flow. He's got cues that he's looking for in each position, in each sector of the stage, and as each one of those is coming up, it may be that on a given position he's got 2 plans depending on where a swinger's at, and he's going to pick that plan and then execute it. It's not to put words in his mouth, but it's not the sort of perfect kind of movie that you visualize ahead of time and then hopefully it goes off flawlessly. Instead, it's much more about getting as much information as you can in your 3 or 4 minute walkthrough, because in IPSC, it's not like USPSA where you could show up an hour early and walk a particularly complicated stage 20 minutes for 20 minutes. In IPSC, now the stages are simpler to some degree because they are built in a way that you're not expected to need 20 minutes to be able to walk them through. There's a certain rhyme and reason to the way they're all built. Generally speaking, obviously there are exceptions to everything, but generally speaking, it's going to be more straightforward because there's this expectation that you will be able to come up with your stage plan in 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how much the match gives you on each given stage. And my interpretation of what he was saying is that basically you don't have enough time to make a perfect visualized walkthrough that will let you shoot the whole thing subconsciously. You basically, as you're doing your walkthrough, again, this is my interpretation, not anything he literally said, but as you're doing your walkthrough, you're looking for certain cues. You're trying to take mental snapshots of target presentations and that sort of thing in each position, so you know what you're looking for. But you have to be very economical with what you're looking at, because you don't have that much time, and you're just not going to be shooting in this sort of pure subconscious bliss where you're just observing yourself shooting and watching the gun go off. And I'm actually inclined to go along with this. I definitely, I have had a chance to shoot 3 matches. So there was a night Wyoming Antelope Club match that that I got to shoot the day after the class, then the whole 3 days of the Pan American, and then since then I've shot a match at Sir Walter, and trying to shift my mindset. Maybe this is just improved results because I'm just trying something different. Sometimes just changing anything can see a short-term positive result. So it's not a done deal. It might be too early to tell, but I personally feel like taking this approach of not expecting to shoot the whole stage in this sort of subconscious, blissful Zen fugue state, whatever you want to call it, which is, I think, kind of the way I'd been trying to shoot, is visualize the stage through 10, 20, 30, 40 times, as much as possible. And then when the time comes, just, press play on the movie and let it happen. And I think that works to some degree with very simplistic stages or very predictable stages. But again, with something like the Pan American match, where even for the 32 rounders, we were only getting a 3-minute walkthrough. As I was walking through, I was looking for cues. And then in my visualization, I was not trying to subconsciously absorb those. I was just walking through, hey, when I get to this spot, this is the cue I'm going to look for. This is what I want to see on the target. This is what I want to do leaving that position, that sort of thing. And then when I was actually going through and shooting it, it was not conscious in the sense that I was thinking about, okay, grip, trigger, squeeze, okay, equal height, equal light. It's not conscious in the mechanics of the shooting, but there were these sort of conscious cues. And for example, at this match this past Saturday at Sir Walter, there was a stage that was a 24-round stage. I was shooting carry optics. I was going to try and shoot it without a reload. I took a makeup shot on a mini popper, and it didn't break my concentration, but during the stage, I sort of heard this voice almost that was like, okay, well, now you have to reload, and here's where you're going to do it. And it wasn't, personally, I found that sort of subconscious shooting mindset is strong but brittle. And as soon as something would go sideways, as soon as anything would go wrong in the stage plan, I felt like I was playing catch up, and it was again very strong but brittle. And so as soon as it broke, it completely shattered. Whereas trying to take this mindset, again, maybe it's just because it's new and I'm still getting used to it, but taking this mindset into the few matches that I've shot since the class, I definitely felt like I was able to adjust to things and also not try and have such strong expectations. So one of the other things that I found in the Pan American match is you can't get a perfect visualization on every stage, every target presentation as you move through the thing. There's just going to be little unexpected things where you, especially with a limited walkthrough in an IPSC match, you're not going to get it exactly right. Your movie is not going to be perfect. It might be that one target appears slightly before another. And in this less subconscious mindset that I think is what Eric was encouraging us to shoot in, but I don't know for sure. It definitely felt like it was just more nonchalant. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I can see that. I guess I'll shoot that guy, and then I'll shoot that guy. Whatever. It was much more flexible, much less brittle. And so that's kind of a long-winded digression, but that, I think, is a part of this idea. So when you take that into practice, the idea is you never want a drill in practice to be perfectly subconscious. You don't want to run the same drill right to left, left to right every single time, because at a certain point, it is going to become subconscious and your transitions are going to get snappier. I mean, anybody who's dry fired the same drill for 5 minutes in a row will feel this, where you'll actually, whatever part time you set at the beginning of the 5 minutes, you'll be beating it by a few tenths by the end. Even though if you were to run that drill first thing tomorrow, you'd be back to your starting part time, because all that's happened is you've sort of learned the exact muscle memory of moving the gun in the predetermined pattern. And so the idea is, don't have any predetermined patterns. Every drill in practice and in dry fire, change up the target order at least, or draw to a different target, or just have every drill be subtly different. And the idea isn't necessarily that you can walk up to a stage and visualize it once and then shoot it, the way you're only going to get 1 or 2 visualizations on each, say, target order in a practice session, but just the idea of getting used to quickly learning different orders and having that skill in your repertoire, and having that part of your brain, even in practice, having that part of your brain that's trying to schedule what the next thing is that you need to do. Oh, okay, I do a reload, and then what target do I come out to? Having that part of your brain be active even when you're practicing, because it's always going to be active during an actual stage. And ultimately, that's what we're practicing for, is a stage, is something that you've never shot before. you visualized it, but there's always going to be that element that you, in a drill where you've repetitively done it 5, 10, 20 times, and again, this is my interpretation, not his exact words, but my interpretation. When you've done a drill that many times, it actually frees up part of your brain power to focus more on gripping the gun, aligning the sights, having a good technique on the reload. And so by running your drills in a way that part of your brain has to stay focused on the order of the targets or the whatever you're doing next in the stage that you've never done before. So it still feels slightly foreign, slightly weird. By having that part of the brain be engaged, you don't have as much brain power to do all the other stuff. And so you practice doing it with the brain power that you're actually going to have available on an actual stage. That's the best pitch I can give for it right now. I don't know that it entirely makes sense, but again, this is one of those things that I'm still piecing through and trying to put into practice in my own shooting. I will say, so again, at the match this past weekend, there was something that Eric said during the class that came to fruition, and what he said, and again, this was during one of these exercises where we were shooting one of these sample stages and everybody was shooting it, and some folks would take a different approach, and there was some discussion at some point about at what point does it make sense to change your stage plan. And he just flat, and this is something that sticks in my mind as a direct quote. He said, in 30 seconds you should be able to reprogram your stage plan. If the next shooter in front of you does something that is significantly better, you should be able to steal it in the time that it takes the staff to reset the stage and then you to make ready and then shoot it. Now, this is in the context of IPSC where the stages do tend to be somewhat simpler, but you should be able to say, oh, he shot this target from there or whatever, and make that change. And ideally you have enough detail in your, not subconscious visualization, but enough detail in the snapshots and the conscious planning that you've done that you can just sort of rearrange the puzzle pieces or whatever. And that's that. This is an N of one. This is one data point. But at the match this past weekend, I was literally walking it through as the on deck shooter. And this was the big field course at Sir Walter on the biggest bay that we have. And it was actually a stage I had designed, and I was walking it through. And during my on deck walkthrough, I saw a nuance that it was easier to take a shot from one place than another, which changing that meant I had to reload. Instead of being able to reload to a 20-round magazine, I needed to reload to a 23-rounder because I was moving a target from being shot in the first magazine to the second. So I had to readjust all that. And instead of saying, oh, there's no way I could revisualize my whole stage plan, I just said, okay, we're just going to make this one tweak. And I just sort of ran through the steps right before and after it and just cued it in, and it worked. And so there's something here. Again, this is the kind of thing that I'm going to be processing and tinkering with for 6 months, a year, maybe the rest of my shooting career. I don't know. But they're definitely early flashes of this mindset of it's not about having this perfect rehearsal that then you just go blank and execute like a robot, but having that bit of your brain active during the stage so that you can adjust to unforeseen things like, jams or whatever. Again, another anecdote from the very first match I shot after the class. It was the Tuesday night match at the Wyoming Antelope Club, and it was the last stage of the day, and I ended up getting a jam where basically there was a round that was too long, and so I go to pull the trigger, nothing happens. I go to rack the slide's locked up, so I had to do the thing where you grab the slide, whack it with the beaver tail of your hand to knock the round loose. And again, it was one of these where I was not trying to shoot in this sort of perfect blank mind, subconscious mindset, but I was taking this sort of this conscious cues approach. And there again, the best way I can describe it is I sort of heard a voice as I'm doing this. I'm grabbing the slide, I'm hitting it with the web of my hand, and I just sort of hear this voice saying, well, you're not going to win raw time, but just get back on the plan. And that was it. And it was the last position. You had to step on a box, and then my plan was to take 2 static targets before the swinger that was activated by the box, and then a third target. And I, again, executed that perfectly. Good points on all the targets, where, again, it's hard to know what would have happened without the class. But my sense is, knowing myself and knowing my shooting, that jam would have thrown me for more of a loop. It would have been more of a, crap, now I got to rush, try, hurry, and all that to make up the time. And there's just a certain sort of calmness and a peace of mind and a mindfulness, not an empty mind kind of state, but a presence of mind. I know this is sounding very woo-woo, but I don't have the words for it. But anyway, yeah, I just kind of had that calmness and just said, all right, get back to it. And so early signs of progress. But anyway, this has gone way far afield. Again, one of the things that was a constant refrain in the class was, even when you were shooting the same target setup twice, pick a different order, start with a different target, or in some cases it would be a sort of quasi-designated target setup where you would pick one target, transition to all the other targets, and between every other target you'd come back to this one that you started on, that kind of thing. And so whether it's in live fire or dry fire, you can apply that approach. You can just pick different target orders. I mean, again, in the interest of stretching your brain and trying to get you away from just doing whatever's the most convenient, because sometimes in a stage you might have to skip a target or shoot a target from a weird spot or see something and wait to engage it from later. Maybe it's a popper that activates a mover or something like that. And so building that into your practice regularly, not just shooting the most convenient left to right, right to left order, but saying, hey, I'm going to start on this guy, then go left, far to the right, and then come back and work the rest of the array right to left. Okay, that's one target order. You shoot it that one way. And you're going to mess it up. And you're going to want to shoot it again and get a do-over. But there are no do-overs. You just got to accept that failure. You just got to live with it. And I'm trying to apply this in live or in my dry fire. It's interesting. I've had 3 sessions so far this way, so it's, again, I'm still getting used to it, but I definitely think there's some promise here. If nothing else, after it's been 8 years since I took the Steve Anderson class, so I've kind of been in a particular form for a while. So even just anything to get me out of that rhythm, get me trying new things, I think is going to help me break through the plateau that I'm on. So that's going to be helpful, I think. Again, I don't know how this compares to other instructors, but something that I did find very interesting when Eric would talk about a particular technique. So take, for example, the afternoon of day 1, when we're talking about just moving left and right. So you're in a position, you need to go to the next position, and it's either directly to your left or directly to your right. How do you push out a position? Where does the gun go? What's your emphasis? And everything that he was talking about, he took probably 5-10 minutes to talk about what would take a second and a half to do: shoot a shot, move to another spot 3 yards away, set up. And he could have just demoed it, but one of the things that I appreciated was the talking it through in almost a painful level of detail. I know I sort of appreciated it, but I could easily imagine someone just wanting to be like, okay, let me just try it. Let me just do this. But he really broke it down. And again, the thing that I appreciated about his approach was he was extremely analytical, and not just talking about what to do, but why. Hey, if you do this, then this is the consequence. And then talking about sort of the cues that he's looking for in each technique. So as an example, the way that he talked about, if you're moving up range and you're turning into the gun. So basically, if you're a right-handed shooter, you're turning your body 90 degrees to the right and bringing the gun in towards your chest. And one of the things that he talked about was, you basically, once you've got your body turned, he wants a sort of kick, like the elbow leads, and that's what kind of pushes him out of position. And then that's sort of the snap. And I'm thinking, okay, physically, the mass of your elbow is not significant relative to the mass of your whole body. But obviously, these are the kinds of cues that he's trained himself on, so that when he wants a certain thing to happen, it's sort of a physical act that is the lead domino that unlocks everything else. And so by having these little cues, you're not just trying to move your whole body, you're kind of focusing your whole mind into one physical action that then everything will be led by. And I appreciated that mindset. It wasn't this, okay, here are the 17 things you need to do all at once. It was, hey, here's the cue for this. First step should feel like that. Second step should be like that. And then from there, you're off and running. And I could see the value of sort of visualizing those things because again, you're almost certainly in a lot of IPSC matches, you're not actually going to get a chance to do a full speed walkthrough of the stage, except maybe right before you go up, just because given the short time frame, you're probably going to have other people in the shooting area, and so the chances of being able to actually do a full speed run or something through the shooting area is pretty low. So I would imagine, again, this is me extrapolating, but I would imagine part of the value of this is you can actually visualize through, even not just, okay, I want to go here, I want to shoot this target, here's kind of the level of confirmation I want to see on it, but then leaving the position, here's the cue I want to feel leaving, because I want to leave in this particular way. Or when I come into the position, here's how I want my feet to feel, that leaves me set up to leave the position aggressively in the direction that I want to go, wherever I'm going to after this. So it was very interesting, again, not just saying do this, but sort of here's why, here are the things that it benefits. And, sometimes you talk about, here are the things I don't recommend. So, for example, one that came up a lot was in the left to right type movement, being a real stickler for keeping the gun very much downrange, nowhere near the 180, probably not even beyond sort of 45 degrees left to right. And he didn't say this, but I would infer it was probably because, especially in IPSC, you travel all over the world. Eventually, you're going to get some real tight RO who's going to decide to call you at 170, and you can say till the cows come home, well, I didn't break it, but if that RO calls it, you've just flown however far around the world to shoot this match for nothing. And so, for him, the benefit of training that way was to be extremely safe, because you never know what ROs you're going to run into. That's my guess, but that was the emphasis that he was talking about, and he sort of showed, hey, here's how you want to position the very nitty gritty details of it, but then also the underlying why. So it wasn't just, hey, I'm the boss, here's what you need to do it, but trying not just to explain the what, but the why, and then beyond that, sort of the cues to create that performance on demand, the little nuances, the lead domino, that if you do this, then naturally you'll want to roll your wrist, and then that, all of these kinds of consequences, which I appreciated. And just his whole general mindset around movement was, don't drop step unless you absolutely need to, just start pushing out of position, just start moving, and keep the gun up high, which I actually found very weird during the stage. This is one of those things that's probably going to take me months to get a handle on it and get a feel for, but it was very interesting. He was talking about, keep the gun up at eye level, just raise your whole arm up and just keep it up. And what I found, just dry firing mostly on the side berms in between chances to actually run the drill live, I found I felt very top heavy, and it actually, what I found was more difficult was stopping. By being sort of keeping your center of gravity high, by being top heavy like that, as soon as you started moving, you really wanted to go. And at that point, the trick was actually sort of catching yourself, keeping your feet under you, and decelerating enough before you got to where you were going. So yeah, again, it's one of those things that's going to take a while to really play around with and integrate, but even within the class, I was already starting to see, okay, there's something here. And so I got to put in the time and figure it out. Definitely the most common question that I got about the class was sort of, was there anything that I learned? Obviously, there was a huge amount that I learned in what surprised me. And so I just have a kind of few odds and ends here at the end of just things that I think were the biggest surprises. So the first one is Eric's personal target in a match, and obviously he's even tighter in practice, but the goal in a match is based on the number of rounds. You should have no more than 10% Charlies and 1% Delta. So if you got a 500 round match, that's 50 Charlies, 5 Deltas across the whole thing. So a very exacting standard. And in shooting minor, that'll work out to be 95% of available points. And I'd asked him, does that apply in major as well, or do you relax it because there are fewer points that you drop per Charlie and Delta? And he said no, same ratios. And I thought that was pretty aggressive. I mean, obviously, it's shooting major, that'll end up putting you at 97+% of points if you really are only shooting 10% of Charlies. But when you do the math on a 10 hit factor stage, the difference between an alpha and a Charlie, okay, it's 1 point. That's a 1/10 of a second. Could you shoot a Charlie in a 30, but an alpha in a 40, or a Charlie in a 25 and an alpha in a 35? I mean, the hit factors have to get pretty high when it's no longer worth taking that extra 1/10. So I thought that was definitely surprising. And then his approach is on a stage. Yeah, if it's a short course, a 12-round stage, okay, you can drop one Charlie at most. If it's a 20-round medium course, two Charlies. And that doesn't really get corrected for the amount of partial visible. You got to aim at whatever alpha you've got available. If there's a given target that you want to use your Charlies on because you just think that there's no chance you can really get the alphas, then so be it. But I maybe it just plays into my natural inclination, but I really appreciated this idea that he basically, unless you're getting up into crazy hit factor territory, he basically was saying there's really no point, no spot in the sport where it's acceptable to just start slinging Charlies and not really care. And I appreciate that. I mean, to be honest, that's one of the reasons that I've really enjoyed shooting production and minor scored divisions, because it rewards getting your alphas. And I mean, it is interesting hearing him talk about that being true even in major. I don't really foresee a scenario, especially with limited kind of declining in popularity, where I would maybe go buy a 40 limited gun. I thought about it a few years ago, but I never got around to it. But even there, applying that same level of accuracy to major actually makes major more appealing to me. One of the things that made major not that interesting to me was this idea that, you can just kind of sling Charlies all over the place and you don't really have to care. Because that's, I don't know, there's just part of me that isn't interested in shooting at that level of accuracy. And so the idea of bringing this very high accuracy standard, I mean, he's literally saying in matches you should be shooting 95% of points in major or in minor and 97% in major. That's pretty stiff stuff, and I am here for it for sure. I am. That is a high standard, and it's one that I want to work to meet for sure. Another one that's here on the list of surprises, and maybe this is just one of those where you can get good with whatever technique you practice enough. I mean, Grauffel is notable for shooting with his index finger wrapped around the trigger guard, which is a pretty unusual technique that you don't really see anywhere else in the practical shooting community. But obviously he's made it work for him. But what he was saying is his approach with iron sights is on hard shots. He is closing one eye and has a hard front sight focus. And I will admit, I definitely am sympathetic to this idea. The closing one eye thing is just absolutely wild to me. I mean, I straight up asked him, I said, so during the stage, you're opening and closing one eye? And he's like, yeah, just not, I mean, it wasn't like a big deal. It was just like, yeah, that's what you do. And I thought that was not something I'd ever heard anyone say or from him or anyone else. So that's pretty wild. I will probably play with that whenever I'm shooting iron sights again. I've flipped over back to the carry optics guns to train up for shooting carry optics at the South Carolina match. So I'm kind of off the iron sights thing for a while, but that was definitely pretty interesting. And I mean, I will say in the last few months, so the last 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it is, since the last time I was shooting carry optics. So I guess basically since the section match. Yeah. So since September, shooting target focus with irons was kind of the name of the game, trying to apply the target focus shooting from the dot back over to the irons. I was definitely seeing a lot of speed in target transitions by just being able to stay focused on the target, leave the sights blurry and all that. But it was definitely coming at a cost of really struggling on steel, in particular plates and mini poppers, where I wasn't getting enough data with the target focus. And I was telling myself, okay, this is just something to work on. And maybe it's something if I stick it out, I can make it work with target focus and just getting, I don't know, somehow getting enough visual information. So for me, as best I could tell, is just an issue with contrast. So when you've got a big cardboard target, whether it's a partial with the no shoot or whatever, you have some contrast where you can see the rear sight kind of fuzzy in your target focus vision and line it up with the front sight. And basically, as best I could tell, my struggles with steel were largely around, I would have the blurry front sight on the crisp target, but I didn't quite have enough visual information to line the rear sight up. And I don't know, maybe there's somebody out there that has a fix for that I could implement. But it was definitely interesting to hear the whatever time world champ just say, yeah, just close one eye and look at the front sight and aim your shot. Like, no big deal. Another thing that was I don't know if this was entirely surprising, but it was definitely eye-opening for me, was when he was describing his standard, what his goal is when he's working on a draw in dry fire, is he's looking for a 0.6 second draw in dry fire with the grip established and the trigger prepped, but the sights being aligned is a bonus but not a requirement. And I definitely, I will have to play with that in practice. I find the idea, it makes a lot of sense that, yes, as you practice, your natural index will get better and better. But if you're applying the idea of never doing the same drill twice, you're always going to be drawing to a slightly different target. And so even if it's only 10 or 20 degrees from the last draw that you did, it's never going to be exactly the same. And so I think, to some degree, this idea of being able to repetitively draw to a single target, do it in 0.6 with the sights aligned every time, it's certainly a different mindset than what he was saying. And I think obviously the foundation of this is the idea of get the gun up as soon as possible. If the sights are aligned, great, start shooting. If they're not, then get them to where you can start cleaning them up as soon as possible. Very straightforward, very, very reasonable. But, the idea is you're never going to do the exact same draw twice. And so the odds of being able to exactly draw the gun and have it show up in 0.6 exactly lined up, centered on the target, it gets less and less likely when you're taking this approach of not just doing the exact same motion over and over again, but every time it's slightly different. So that's definitely something I'll have to play with. I've never had a particularly fast draw. I've never done one-shot draw type stuff in practice in any significant way. I might just play around with it for 50 rounds or something in a practice session, but I've never tracked my times or done anything like that, trying to really focus on getting a fast draw. But in part, that was because in my mindset, and again, I think what a lot of Americans tell each other is, well, you only draw once during the stage, and in a long stage, it's a pretty small fraction of the time, so what's the point? And his attitude was, well, first of all, in IPSC, there are a lot more shorter stages, so you're doing a lot more draws in a match, right? You take the Pan American, for example, that's a 30 stage match, so if you can shave, and this is how he would talk, if you can shave 2/10 off your draw, well, across 30 stages, that's 6 seconds. That's pretty significant. It doesn't seem like much, but it adds up. And that was the whole attitude is, okay, if you can shave 1/10 off every transition in the entire match, and there's 250 targets in the match, that kind of, wow, okay, if you take something small, but you scale it across an entire match and you put it in perspective, and then you say, well, what would I give to be able to pick up 25 seconds? Well, if maybe you could get 25 seconds by speeding up your every 250 transitions by 1/10. That's an idea. So I appreciated that sort of analytical, taking something micro and scaling it up. But again, also the idea of get the gun out and then start cleaning things up. And yes, the draw is not huge, but if it's low hanging fruit, if you can shave a couple tenths there safely, he wasn't he was not a proponent of the scoop draw or anything. But if you can get a reliable 0.6 draw in dry fire and then draw at that speed in a stage, regardless of the target difficulty, pretty standard stuff in that sense, then why would you not do that? There's no reason to slow down your draw just because it's a harder target. Get the gun out, start cleaning up the sight picture, and do it as quickly as possible because it's free time. And then honorary mention here once again to the whole subconscious shooting doesn't really work thing. I don't want to put too many words in his mouth, but it was definitely interesting. It's a new approach. I'm definitely going to be working with it and exploring it and figuring out what works and what doesn't. For the next months, years, maybe forever. We'll see. And then kind of the last thing I had on the list of surprises per se here was this showed up in different facets, but he really put a lot of emphasis on kind of focusing on doing one thing at a time until you're done doing it, and then do the next thing as much as possible. Obviously, there are some places where you have to shoot on the move, and then you are doing two things at once. But in general, he was talking about, for example, with position entries and exits, don't be in a hurry to leave the position. Stay as long as you need to get the alphas that you want. But as soon as you call that last shot, then get out of there. But if you start trying to play this game of trying to lift a foot or shift your weight or get out of position, if something goes wrong or you have a jam, then you've really made a problem for yourself. And so this sort of single tasking focus everywhere that's possible, just to do each thing as quickly as possible, and then once it's done, boom, on to the next one, boom, on to the next one. It was definitely different. It was definitely unique. Again, something to play with, something that I appreciate and will be trying to put into practice, because I think a lot of the emphasis in especially sort of American shooting culture is blend as many things together as you can. If you can start lifting a foot while you're shooting a target, do it. And I definitely tend to overdo that kind of thing. I mean, I'll think, okay, I want to start leaving this position, but instead of leaving it on the last target, I'll start picking up a foot and starting to move on the second to last target, which means then I'm shooting the last target already with some decent speed, which is not super productive. So watching Eric shoot, it seemed like he practiced what he preached here. There were definitely a couple stages at the Wyoming Antelope Club match that we got to shoot together where he could have started to shift his weight or lift a foot on a 10-yard, 7-yard open target, but he didn't. He just stayed planted nice and firm until he was done shooting, and then boom, out of there. No hesitation, but also no kind of blending. Now, there were a few spots where he did shoot on the move as sort of a discrete action, but there wasn't a ton of sort of shooting, entering, and exiting, which I found interesting. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I've already talked way too long about this class. I learned a huge amount. I didn't even cover a lot of the nitty-gritty technique stuff, but definitely if you have the chance to take a class with him, do it. I know it's a pretty rare thing in the US. I believe if you've got the resources, you can fly out and take a class with him at the indoor range there in France, where he's made his home base, which, I mean, obviously that would be an awesome experience, but I imagine the financial commitment for something like that would be significant. But yeah, I know the strapped guys want to get him to do more classes here. Hopefully it'll happen. Hopefully more folks have a chance to train with him. It was definitely worth it. I wouldn't pass up the opportunity if I had it again, for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's if you want, he's doing, he's got some kind of online class thing where they're filming videos, and I guess you join, and I don't know. He's doing the online coaching thing, so look at that. It's definitely on the expensive side, but I mean, it's cheaper than what I paid for this class, so I don't know. It depends on what it's worth to you, but look into it. Definitely appreciated the perspective. He definitely looks at things differently, I think, from a lot of folks. Very, like I said, very analytical, very precise, but at the same time, very sort of simple and straightforward. He wasn't trying to say, oh, you need to pat your belly and tap your head and, do all these 17 things all at once. It was just very, very simple stuff, just done immediately in a very tight chain, no delays, no hesitation, but just for the most part, executing one thing at a time, just serial production, just boom, one right after another, knock things out and get your alphas. So that's I think that's about all I have to say. I mean, I'm sure I'll be talking about it some more as the podcast continue, but that will definitely do it for tonight. Sorry for how long this went. Hopefully it is useful. And that wraps up this episode of Short Course. My email is ben@berryshooting.com. Talk to you next time.